Thank y'all. Just a couple of house cleaning items. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Marvin, I ended up in the National Guard in high school back when the judges used to tell you either go to the Army or go to jail, right? And Steve, you're right. On opinions, I remember when I got elected to the Attorney General's post, my mom said, "You finally got a job where your opinion counts." So, look, it's a pleasure to be here. This is actually the first time I get to speak on any topics this year. And it's exciting to be before you all. You have a great, great club. Let me, before I begin, I want to put on because I got a little video presentation, a little visual, some of the things that the Attorney General's office does. Because when I was running for Attorney General, I would go and I'd see people and say, "Look, I'm running for Attorney General." And they're like, "Huh? What does the Attorney General do?" And unless you were a lawyer, they quite didn't know what the office does. And so, just a couple of things that we've been doing, both that the office does and some of the things that we're doing to place Louisiana on the map over the last 2 years, because he's right, we're kind of at halftime in our term. I was actually elected and am going to take over in June of this year as the president of the National Association of Attorney Generals, which is an association that's put together by all 50 attorneys general in the country. It's a great, great organization, and I'm excited to lead it. I also serve on the executive committee of the Republican Association of Attorney Generals, which is RAGA, and of course the Democrats have one called DAGA. It's similar. And our office has received a number of prestigious awards. One of the ones that I'm real proud of is the Inspector General's Award for Excellence in Fighting Fraud, Waste, and Abuse. And there's a couple of other things that the office does. I chair the Law Enforcement Officer and Fireman's Survivor Benefit Board. It's one of the most sobering parts of my job. And last year, we issued payments to 37 grieving families of fallen heroes, the service of police officers or firemen who died in a line of duty. I can promise you that I wish that that's one board I hope we would never have to issue another check on. But we've been working hard to make sure that those widows and those families receive the benefits that the state has put in place for them. We had over 100 arrests, several hundred arrests, when you count both our Medicaid fraud unit, our ICAT unit, which is Internet Crimes Against Children, when it deals with public corruption. I said that was one of my key points and why I wanted to run for Attorney General, to try to help kind of polish up Louisiana's image in the rest of the country. We've been successful in that state. We've got a lot further to go. And so those are some of the things that your Department of Justice is working on, and some of the things that we're going to keep working on over the course of the next 2 years. And now, I'd really like to talk to y'all about two very, very important topics. And the first one has a little bit of video that I think is important, kind of helps walk us in.
This map shows the U.S. death rate from drug overdose in 1999. By 2015, the map looked like this. Most of these deaths were opioid related.
That's a pretty sobering map. And that was a piece from 60 Minutes that they did in regards to the opioid epidemic. I don't think it's any secret that we have an epidemic. In fact, I spoke about this last year consistently on the road, and I like to just do a little bit of an illustration. How many people in this room, just with a show of hands, has been impacted by this epidemic, knows someone, a friend, a family member, who has been impacted by an opioid, either related death or someone who's abusing opioids. Wow. I mean, look at that. I mean, that's pretty sobering. I think if, being a police officer in the 1990s, when we went through the crack cocaine epidemic, that at the time was driving violent crime, I think if I'd asked that question, I don't think you would have seen that many hands go up. And I think that's important, an important distinguishment, because the opioid epidemic knows no boundaries. Doesn't matter whether you're rich, or poor, or white, or black, or Hispanic, whether you have a college education or not, whether you have a professional degree or you're a blue-collar worker. This epidemic is absolutely killing Americans. In fact, more Americans have died from opioid-related deaths since 1999 than all of the lives lost in World War I, Korea, and Vietnam. I mean, that is a sobering number. And this epidemic has taken Louisiana by storm. In fact, it's concerning right here in Baton Rouge. I don't know if you know this, but Baton Rouge currently ranks 23rd nationally in the percentage of citizens abusing prescription opioids. It ranks 17th nationally in opioid prescription abuse. Louisiana is one of 8 states where we have more opioid prescriptions than we actually have people in the state of Louisiana. Yeah, it's pretty sobering. And one of the things that I spoke about last year and got criticized for is the fact that compounding these problems, the governor did Medicaid expansion, right? And policy decisions actually have consequences. If you make a policy decision in government and you don't walk your way through it carefully, they absolutely have consequences. And right now, that Medicaid expansion has put 390,000 more opioid prescriptions in the hands of Medicaid recipients in this state. We started, prior to Medicaid expansion, we had around 500,000 prescriptions that were being paid for by you all. And after 12 months later, we had almost 400,000 more. Now think about that for a second. Think about what kind of fuel to the fire it adds to an epidemic, to a map like the one that you just saw. And it's important to notice, and I get upset about this because guess what? It's taxpayer paid. So we're fueling, or we're putting in place programs that if we don't put in the proper protocols, now the legislature has started to respond since then, right? But if you don't think through those particular steps, you feed an epidemic. And that hinders our law enforcement agents out there. And of course, I've been a big critic of this Medicaid expansion because of the abuse and the fraud that I see every day in it. In fact, there was the legislative auditor just came out, found that we were spending $718,000 was spent on people who were already deceased. I think there were 14,000 people who were receiving Medicaid benefits that don't even live in Louisiana. The legislative auditor had another report that said that there were over $30 million that had not been reimbursed to the Medicaid system on third-party liability claims because nobody's going after them. Our Medicaid fraud unit is one of the best in the country. It's not one of the best because of Jeff Landry. It's one of the best because we have had people that have been working in the Medicaid fraud unit for decades now that understand the work, need the help, and need more resources. And at a time when you expand Medicaid, it's natural that you should put in place the safety mechanisms to ensure that taxpayers' money, that the money that you all send to the Treasury is spent wisely. Because Medicaid is an important program. And when people abuse it, when people defraud it, they're taken away from those who need it the most. And we hear constantly about the lines and the waits and the lists of people who are waiting for those types of services, indigent people who absolutely need those services. And yet when there are hundreds of millions of dollars that are being defrauded and stolen out of those systems, I believe that someone has a responsibility to go out there, prosecute those people, bring them to justice, and to try to recover as much money back to the taxpayers as we can. And that's what we've been doing. And so to go back and talk about the opioid crisis, you know, when I started as the Attorney General, I knew this was going to be an epidemic. We could hear it. I talked to police officers on the street. I talked to first responders. And so I said, you know what? It's going to be a goal of mine to do something about it, to try to be a part of what needs to be a very comprehensive solution, because there's not a silver bullet that we can say, oh yeah, we're going to do this, and tomorrow it's going to be gone. And so what did we start doing? You know, one of the first things we did, we joined a number of other states in ensuring that we held opioid manufacturers and the distributors accountable. We had a multi-state investigative group that's working with a number of states that are banded together to determine whether or not these opioids have been put on the street kind of recklessly, and whether or not the doctors were given the right information about the impacts of this medicine. Because the people who need them, there's absolutely a legitimate use for these drugs, but it's important that the doctors had the information and that the patient understands the consequences of taking the medication. So we're investigating them. We partnered with the Louisiana Ambulance Alliance to create a website called endepidemicla.org so that the general public out there had an easy go-to source to understand some of the effects of the epidemic, how to maybe look for symptoms of someone who may be addicted, and where to go to get help. And then we had a real interesting issue came to me. You know, I had inherited a number of pharmaceutical cases from my predecessor. When I started, I called them my 11 problem children. I can say that because I was a problem child. And so I started working on trying to get these cases resolved. And one of the cases was against Pfizer Pharmaceutical. And it was an old case, and we were really not getting anywhere. We were getting some real negative adverse rulings out of the court system. And Pfizer came to me and they said, look, we'd like to do something unusual, something that's never been done. I said, well, I'm the guy. I like to do things that have never been done. You could have never, ever made me believe that I'd represent y'all as the Attorney General, even go to Congress. I said, so I like to think outside the box. And he said, well, what we'd like to do is we'd like to settle this case. We don't really think it's worth anything, but here's what we'll offer you. We'll give you $1 million worth of naloxone product as a settlement. My first question as a business owner was, is that at the retail or wholesale price? Because again, policy decisions have impacts, right, and effects. And so, yes, we worked with Pfizer. I said, yes, absolutely. I'm interested. How are we going to work it out? And between myself, my chief deputy, our staff, Monica Taylor, who works for us, we worked through an entire process carefully before we told anyone we were thinking of settling that case. From the price of the medication, what's going to be, we wanted the lowest possible wholesale price. We wanted to make sure they wasn't just shipping us 60,000 vials of naloxone that are going to sit in some warehouse, and in 1 year they're going to have a shelf life, and we're not going to be able to use them, right? That sounds familiar with the government. That's right, par right up the government's case to do something like that. How are we going to distribute them? How are we going to effectively get them to our law enforcement agents? And so we worked on a program that I tell you what, I'm proud of it. It's great. Our staff did a wonderful job of rolling it out. We had great response on it. And what we do is we give coupons out to law enforcement agencies out there, and they can go to their pharmacy, local pharmacy, and they can exchange it for naloxone, which they can keep in their units. And I'm going to tell you, I spoke to a number of sheriffs and chiefs who have already saved someone's life who's in an opioid-induced coma, because this is the antidote that actually absolutely saves lives. But that's only part. So we got an educational part. We've got a part that actually saves lives. And then in the fall or summer, I don't remember, we kind of still been rolling out. We just ended it. We partnered with Blue Cross Blue Shield and the National Association of Drug Diversion Investigators. And our goal was to try to put a drug prescription take-back box in every parish in the state. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands because I don't want to embarrass myself and everyone else of who has medicine in their cabinets that they don't use anymore, that they don't take. That's probably stuck way in the back. It just kind of builds up and builds up. Well, a lot of those prescriptions are opioids. And it's been a proven fact that a lot of addicts get addicted by experimenting with someone else's prescription. They go in their medicine cabinets and let me check this out. Let me try this out. And then we know the tragedy that beholds them. And so what we tried to do, we said, look, we're going to put one of these boxes in every parish, and we're going to invite the public to come and clean out their medicine cabinets. And I'm going to tell you something, the response has been phenomenal. In fact, when we went up to Shreveport, this was funny. We go up to Shreveport to do the press conference on it. We put the box in the sheriff's office, right, downstairs where it's going to be. They bolted it down. And it hadn't even placarded it yet. It just said drug prescription take-back box. The next day they went to placard it, they opened it up, there were drugs inside of it. Prescription drugs inside of it. I mean, think about it. We didn't even make an announcement, and people were using it. And so again, that is absolutely part of the solution. So we got an educational component, and we got a life-saving component. And we've got we've got a citizens involvement component, which is you helping clean out your medicine cabinets to try to take those opioids out of cabinets and off of the street. And so we hope that that you utilize them and that you get involved. And of course, this opioid epidemic, this brings me to the second thing I want to talk about. Okay? I'm checking my time real quick. The second thing I want to talk about is violent crime. Because this opioid epidemic is absolutely contributing to a rise of violent crime in this country. I said it back in the fall of 2016, and some of the statements I made about problems that were going on in the city of New Orleans. I said that if we don't contain and come up with a solution, that violent crime was going to continue and spread out around the state, and we've seen it. We've absolutely seen it. In fact, we've seen it right here in the Baton Rouge metropolitan area. In 2017, 104 people were murdered last year in East Baton Rouge Parish. That's a record number of homicides. If you look at the map, I mean, it's not like it's all contained in one particular area. It tells you that we've got a problem. I'm not telling you that we're to blame law enforcement out there. They're not the ones that are shooting someone else. They're out there trying to save lives. But they're working diligently to try to solve those murders. But it's a big, big problem we have. But I think if we recognize that the opioid epidemic is part of what's driving violent crime, at least we know that when we stem that epidemic, we should also see some of that violent crime be abated. But then we got another problem. So in the middle of an opioid epidemic, in the middle of a violent crime surge, now these statistics, you know, I just don't want y'all to feel alone in the world. There are a lot of cities that are seeing violent crime increase. Then we go and we do criminal justice reinvestment. We have a criminal justice reinvestment task force. made up of 30 people. I want y'all to know, I run the Department of Justice. For you all, I was not invited. We had only one sheriff, one DA, and one judge on a 30-man task force that was going to go out and determine how we do criminal justice reform in this state. And now we're letting out 2,000 inmates a month more than we were before. People who were in jail, who were sentenced, and I can promise you this. I don't know, there any prosecutors in this room? I don't want to ask about the lawyers. I don't want you to throw them out just yet. But I'm going to tell you, the people that are in jail are not first offenders, okay? Our system is absolutely broken. I'm the first one that will tell you that it's broken. But you don't say just to save money, we're going to release people who are in jail, who committed a crime, because on the other end of that crime is a victim. And what we've seen since then, I mean, face after face after face of people who were released, going right back in jail. I mean, we've got great examples of all of this. I mean, this is one, Kennecopp's arrested an armed robbery suspect just days after he was released from prison. And every day we're reading this. You know what that's telling me? That's telling me that our program is failing. Why? Because policy decisions have consequences. And if you don't thoroughly vet them, if you don't think through each one of the steps, if you don't walk yourself through, okay, realistically, when we do X, what is going to happen? Are we going to get Y, or are we just going to go all the way to Z, or are we going to go all the way back to A? Because if you want to do criminal justice reform, you can look at our neighboring state. I know everybody wants to be like Texas, right? Not me. But I will tell you this. Texas did it right. But you know what they did? They invested up front. They put over $200 million up front in their justice reinvestment program. Why? So that they could screen people who were in jail, who were on good behavior, who were getting ready to be released. And what did they do? They gave them a skill. They mandated that they got a skill. How many employees over here are looking for skilled labor? How many? I could tell you some of the most talented people in the world are in jail. I know, I was a jailer at one time. It just amazed me. We had guys down in the motor pool. We had inmates down there. I'm telling you, they could fix anything. It's amazing. And if you work on them, you give them a skill, you give them a GED, then guess what? When they get out, they have an opportunity. They have an opportunity to go out there and make an honest living. And we don't see the recidivism. You know, I think it's important that we understand, again, that the policy decisions we make have consequences if they're not properly vetted. And I think we have a responsibility to talk to our legislators and to recognize that at a time when we have an opioid epidemic, when we have a violent crime epidemic sweeping this country, is not the time to just carte blanche release people out of jail, or to soften sentences, or to determine, we'll see how that works, whether saving money is more important than safety, because it's a public safety issue. And so 2018, a goal for me is to work on these issues and to find solutions to these issues. And I can tell you, our solutions are right in front of us. We need to help fund our drug courts. We need money for rehab services, education, and law enforcement. And when we invest in those 4 legs, we're going to get a solid stool here. We absolutely will get a chair that we can all sit on, and it's going to be safe. Thank you so very much, and I appreciate your time.
We have a moment or two for a question or two. If you have a good question, then raise your hand. Barbara.
As a Metro Council person here in Baton Rouge, we've been dealing with the Alton Sterling issue for a long time now. Do you have any idea when there might be a resolution to that and something coming from your office?
Look, I appreciate the question. We issued a statement when we got the material from the U.S. Department of Justice. And at the time that we got that information, I know that it was day 380 something for y'all. It was day one for us. And we issued a statement at that time that we were not going to comment on the investigation. We have been working diligently since we've received that evidence, and we're working as fast as we can, but we're going to ensure that the process is done in a very, very thorough manner.
What's your position on the state's medical marijuana introduction?
That is a great question. Great question. And what would that'd probably be the last one. No. No. Look, his question was, what is my position on marijuana? The problem is, or medicinal, but it doesn't matter. Okay, here's the problem. 1971, Drug Enforcement Act. FDA schedules drugs. Marijuana is listed as a Schedule 1. Makes it illegal. It's illegal. There's nothing has changed as far as the legality, as far as where the law is, as far as standing on the law. Then we talk about medicinal use for marijuana. We have an FDA, okay, that is supposed to regulate and ensure that proper procedures and products that are effective for combating diseases in this country are passed through. Now, since 1971 to now, I don't know, I'm sure the FDA has looked at this. They haven't responded. It amazes me. If you believe that marijuana should be legal, then we need to take that debate and have it in the halls of Congress. FDA needs to reschedule it. If they reschedule it, it's not a problem. But until they reschedule it, it puts people like myself and our law enforcement agents out there and the Attorney General for this country in a pretty odd predicament, which I think is the predicament that we find ourselves in, especially over the last 10 years, where we scratch our head saying what's going on in this country, where we got rules, we got laws that people are picking and choosing which law to follow. That's not how this country operates. When there's a law and we don't like it, there's a process that you can go about amending it and changing it. But until Congress tells me that marijuana is not a Schedule 1 and the distribution, whether it be for medicinal use, okay, or recreational use, is allowed, then I have no other choice but to uphold that law. Thank you so very much.